everyone to today's webinar, Shifting Mindsets, How Communication Can Help Shape Early Childhood Outcomes. My name's Rani Kumar. I'm the Head of Policy and Campaigns at NatCan, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar. I'm speaking to you today from the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I would like to acknowledge these lands and pay my respects to elders past, present and future, and to extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander colleagues who are on this webinar today. Today, we're talking about the importance of communication. How do we communicate to support the development, the well-being and safety of all children? The stresses in families of the ongoing coronavirus pandemic and the various lockdowns in different regions means the need to pay attention to how we communicate, to our content and our style. What we say and how we say it is even more pressing. By thinking carefully about how we frame our communications, we can help drive change and improve outcomes for children. So in this webinar today, we have a stellar cast to talk through the research on what works and the practical strategies for how you can start implementing these strategies into your work today. We have Nat Kendall-Taylor from the Frameworks Institute to explain the research and the evidence base. We have Annette Fuller from Before Early Years Coalition in Tasmania, who has been implementing the research in their programs. And our very own Merryn Looney, the Northern Territory Manager for NatCan, who's going to share insights of successful adoption of the strategies as well. I'm looking forward to hearing from all of them, and I know all of you must be too. I just need to run through some quick housekeeping and then we can get to the speakers. We will have time for question and answer session towards the end of today's session after the speakers have presented. Thank you to anyone who's already submitted a question. We've got a really great stack already, and some of those questions might be answered as you watch the presentations today. For questions that you think of during the webinar, please do send them through the questions box in your GoToWebinar dashboard. Any questions that we can't get to, the presenters will answer offline, and we'll add that extra content to the broadcast and create an extended version that we will make available soon on the CFCA website. If you haven't already, do subscribe to the CFCA news and you'll be notified when this is ready. In the handout section of your GoToWebinar control panel, you'll find reflective questions for you to consider as you listen to the presentations, as well as other resources the presenters refer to during their presentations. When the webinar finishes, or if you need to hop off early, a short feedback survey will open in a new window. We really appreciate your feedback, and CFCA are always working to improve on the webinars, so do take the time to fill that in. So today we are going to start with Nat Kendall-Taylor. What better place to start? And the research that underpins our discussion today. Unfortunately, because Nat is based in the US, he has had to pre-record his presentation. It's well past bedtime over there. So after Nat, we'll get Annette, who'll come on and talk about her experiences implementing this approach in their programs. And then you'll hear from Merryn Looney, who will come together to talk about her experiences implementing it in the Northern Territory, after which we'll discuss your questions. So over to Nat.
Hello, everyone. How are you doing? Ronnie, thanks for passing the mic. Looking forward to talking with you all today about some of the work that we've done with a whole bunch of partners around more effectively communicating about the importance, the salience, the necessary solutions to better support young children and their families today. I'm really happy to get to be here, even if it is only virtually. I aspire next year to be there in person with you all for National Child Protection Week. That is, Ronnie, if you'll have me. I totally miss all of my Australian colleagues and the energy and the learning that I get from the amazing work that you all do. So it's good to have a goal next year in person. But I will certainly take this virtual opportunity to talk to you about framing today. Those of you who know me know that I'll take any opportunity to talk about framing, and this is certainly a good one here today. And what I hope I can do is kick off, tee up, set up a conversation. We'll set up the two speakers that are coming after me, Annette and Merryn, who are going to tell you about the kind of applied half of the communications equation that I'm going to present. I am going to talk about how communications is a tool that we maybe don't always think of or don't think fully enough about, that can add important value and supercharge the work that we all are doing in attempts to better and more fully support young children and their families. And I'm going to talk about a particular idea within the field of communications, and that is the idea of framing. And I'm going to introduced the idea of framing and used these lovely cows to do so. So this is an exercise that, again, is better done in person, but we're going to do it virtually here. And the way that it works is I show you this picture and I ask you, and I tell you that that this cow front and center, Bessie here, is sick, and I ask you why. And the way that this normally works when it's done in person is that people say, normally it's, something must be wrong with the grass that Bessie is eating, or the cows around Bessie must be sick, or sometimes people say maybe they got into the trash of this guy in the brick house in the background. And that all makes sense. But what if I shift the perspective and I change the frame and I show you this? And you can see clearly here how including different information, expanding the lens that we're seeing, gives us a remarkably different way of understanding and answering and orienting towards this question of what's going on with Bessie. And that really is the idea of framing. When we talk about framing in the work that we do at Frameworks and the work that we do with our partners at NAPCAN and Telephone Kids Institute and a number of our other partners, what we're talking about is those choices, that choice in the frame that we use, the inclusion or exclusion of certain information. We're interested, when we think about framing, in how all of those choices, both big and small, big like values and metaphors, small like pronouns and verbs, how all of those choices that we make as communicators, and I'm going to argue that each and every one of us on this call today is a communicator and has an incredible power to tap into in that role, how all of those choices affect how people think, how they feel, and how they act as a result of hearing what it is that we have to say. And there have been a number of examples. I've been collecting examples over the last year and a half of ways that we've seen framing and sometimes really small choices affect kind of the discourse around COVID in particular and early childhood, and how people think and feel about these issues. And I'm going to give you three really quick ones just to drive home both the importance of framing, but also it's sometimes taken for granted, very nuanced, very subtle ways in which those small things end up having big effects in how we think about issues. And so the first one, and these are all US examples, but I think they pertain based on what I know about the Australian context. The first one is a lot of the discourse that we've been hearing primarily for the past 6 months to a year about the number of mothers who are leaving the workforce in record numbers. And what this construction does through largely this verb of leaving is it ascribes individual responsibility to mothers, as making the decision to do this. It kind of takes away all of the context of the equation here, the fact that mothers aren't making this decision by themselves alone in some vacuum, but are being pressured by context, by the economy, by employment, by childcare to make these decisions. And last and not least, it kind of feeds and reifies a number of the gender stereotypes that we hold and that become active when we think about mothers. The second one, this is a really good one, meaning a really bad one. Parents with young children are skipping well-child vaccination visits. This is a phenomenon in the United States, and I imagine is evident in Australia as well. And it's really just one word in what you see here that has a dramatic effect in terms of what people think and feel and do when it comes to parents, and that is the verb of skipping. When we talk about parents skipping, what we allow people to do, what we kind of push people to do, is to blame those parents, again, kind of divorce them from context. And in the United States, where these figures are not evenly experienced across the population, but it's poor people, it's people of color who are missing visits, it allows people room to apply their racist and classist stereotypes. And last but not least, the discourse that's kind of raging around kind of adolescents and slightly older children is this idea of this kind of lost generation, that we'll be living with the consequences of this lost generation for years to come. And again, it's dramatic. This is almost taken word for word from a number of headlines. But what this does really powerfully is it gets us to a point where we're thinking very fatalistically about the ability to do anything for young people who have experienced the last year and a half. It creates unproductive understandings of the potential for solutions and activates kind of unproductive negative understandings of young people. And so the way to think about framing, the way that I think about framing, is through the use of this metaphor that you see on the screen, this idea of a key. that framing has the ability, the choices that we make and how we present our information, how we engage with our those who we're providing support or our colleagues and other professionals, has the ability to unlock new conversations, new ways of thinking about issues, new ways of kind of coming to and appreciating the importance of solutions. But as you just saw in those three examples, a key does the other thing too, right? It has the ability, those choices that we make have the ability to lock things up, to close down thinking, to eliminate space for productive conversations, to decrease support, and kind of allow people to reject solutions. And what I want to talk about quickly, I'm going to talk about some work that we've done on child maltreatment in the UK, actually, to give you an example of kind of the importance of this key and the ways that we select them and how they can have this either opening kind of positive effect, or how the choices that we make can do the opposite, how they can lead to unproductive understandings, lead to ways of engaging with these issues that really are not in line with what we're trying to do. And I'm going to talk about metaphor in particular. So when it comes to issues of child abuse and neglect, child maltreatment, people have a proclivity to understand these issues through individual causes, through parents or adults who, choose to do bad things to kids. And we know very well from a lot of research in social sciences that has to do with child maltreatment, but more generally, that when people have these individual level understandings of cause, they go to individual level solutions, right? So this is about people making better decisions. This is about people trying harder. Now, there's certainly something to say about this. I mean, child maltreatment, abuse, and neglect are acts that are related and have to do with individual volition and decisions and effort. But there's also this other piece that's really important, and you all know this in your work, these kind of more social or contextual causes. And we know that when people can think about these social causes, they go to dramatically different solutions. They go to public, they go to policy, they go to programmatic solutions, and they think about better services and more supports rather than just individuals trying harder and making better decisions. The argument is that we need people to be able to hold both of these things in mind if we're going to do our work in creating better outcomes for kids. And the problem, as I said, is that we know this in Australia, and this is certainly the case in the UK and in the US, is that these ways of thinking are not even. There's not parity between individual causes in terms of how people understand these issues and social causes. So our work is to figure out how to use these keys to rebalance this and allow people to engage with both of these perspectives that are critical to their ability to come with us in our work and engage with solutions. And again, we've done a lot of this work through the use of metaphors that reorient people's thinking. And what I'm going to show you now is some before and after on the street interviews. These were all done in the UK, some in London and other areas in the Midlands and in the north of the country, where you're going to see people first talking about child maltreatment, child neglect, without the benefit of frames, without the benefit of a metaphor. And then I'm going to show you how that discussion changes once people are primed, once people are introduced with a metaphor to think about the issue. So first is the before. This is how people talk and think about child neglect without the benefit of one of these framing keys.
What are some of the reasons why children are neglected?
Yeah. I mean, I think there could be a lot of things. One, parents. I mean, it all depends on the parent.
Lack of understanding of how to be a parent.
Some people produce children and have no responsibility for them.
Maybe they're too self-absorbed.
Too selfish.
I guess they shouldn't be parents. They just weren't made to have children.
A lot of people have children without really fully comprehending what is expected of them as parents.
They don't know what it is to show love to another person.
So what do you think could be done in this country to reduce levels of neglect?
I think when someone has that decision to have a child, they need to really step up to the plate and obviously make sure they're doing what's needed for the kid.
I think everybody's got to change their behaviour.
Don't always hope for a handout.
You see these people who have got like 19 kids from 7 different women, and they're milking the system.
I believe it comes from the individual as opposed to something that you can put around people.
You would only get help if you help yourself.
You can't obviously control people and how they live their lives.
People don't necessarily get educated as to how to bring up their children.
I'd say it's just a bit too difficult to say that you'd have to cure poverty in order to prevent neglect.
So again, it's very evident that people's their default orientation to this issue is highly individualistic. It's choices that parents make or do not make. It's the level of effort that they exert in caring or not caring. And again, the task here that we undertook is how do you not eliminate those individual considerations, which are certainly part of the issue, but how do you balance it? How do you introduce into this thinking, into this conversation, a contextual perspective? And we did that through the use of a metaphor, a kind of overloaded metaphor that explains that when people are carrying too much weight, like a lorry, like a truck, they can become overloaded to the point of breaking down. In a similar way, when parents are burdened with things like the stress of poverty or lack of support, that this weight can lead to problems in the way that they interact in the relationships that they have with their children. And part of the solution is thus figuring out how to reduce the initial load, but also support those who are bearing kind of disproportionate amounts of it. And when people are primed with a less wonky version of what I just did, you get conversations that look and sound dramatically different from the one that you just heard, that look and sound like this. How does that make you think about what would cause neglect?
People don't have the means, they don't have even the mental ability to do it anymore if they themselves are suffering for whatever reason.
Become overloaded by life and what it's throwing at you, then yes, I'd say neglect is probably more likely to happen.
All these conditions that little by little, take away our capacity of caring.
Financial worries.
The feeling that you're, in a situation that you don't have full control of.
Worries about exactly when the next meal is going to come from. Worries about their living condition.
As stuff comes along that's stressful, that's difficult, you sort of takes away some of your ability to do stuff that you have to do.
All these things just get in the way.
So you're always firefighting, and because of that, you don't have the time that's necessary, you need to actually nurture your children properly.
Everything is just a great deal more tough.
What does that suggest could be done to reduce levels of neglect in the UK?
I think you would need to address why these people feel overloaded. What are the reasons behind it?
Perhaps third parties are, someone else who's prepared to come along and share the load with you.
Support is needed. Support is needed there.
Obviously, they need help. They need experience.
Just having more kind of advisors within communities that parents are encouraged to go to.
It's not about demonising the person who's neglecting. It's about realising that actually they're totally subject to all these external factors.
So I hope you could hear that. I realized my dog just started barking right in the middle of that, but a dramatically different conversation, obviously one that's much more balanced and oriented towards appreciating the role of those contextual factors. So the work that we've done with Telethon Kids Institute and other partners really has been kind of how can we find the keys that unlock thinking in Australia about the importance of early childhood and the need to better support families. And we've done this through a project that has included almost 7,500 Australians, but that we've built that on research that has been conducted over more than 8 years in Australia with a lot more participants, and then based on work that Frameworks, the organization that I lead, has done globally with a very large sample of participants. And what this research has shown is the importance of a coherent story, a narrative about early childhood that really plays the role of unlocking more productive space for people to think about these issues. And it's a story that starts with the kind of issue, setting the issue at the level of health and well-being, the way that the development of children affects their health as children and their future health and well-being as adults, that this issue matters largely because of a frame or setting the frame around fairness, that no matter where a child lives, that each and every child needs to have the opportunity to be healthy and well. An answer to the question of when that not only is oriented towards the kind of future effects of development, but really grounds the discussion in the experiences, the well-being, the relationships of families and children now. Every story has to have a bad guy. The bad guy of this story is the way in which the lack of support in some areas for some Australians disrupts that development and undermines that health and well-being. And then the solution is to provide the support that each and every child needs in the way that they need that support. And what this looks like, just to give you a quick example, when it comes to this now and later frame is to move from a way of framing information that the field of early childhood has used, some might argue to great effect, for a long time, which is really focused on the down the line, on the future effects, to one that is more balanced in talking not only about the later, but the effects of supporting kids and families now in terms of their well-being and relationships and quality of life and health and all of these things. So the challenge now is, how do you take that story that has emerged from all of this research that plays that productive version of the key in unlocking space and ways to talk and ways to think about solutions? How do you take that out into the real world, out into a field that, at least in the United States, kind of looks like this when it comes to communication? Every organization, every sub-issue has their own way of talking. And if this is the way your communications landscape looks, it's highly unlikely that you're going to be able to shift mindsets to do that unlocking function. And what we are at the point of doing in Australia is thinking about how you move from this kind of relatively orthogonal, that's a fancy word, chaotic or kind of discordant sense of communication to one that is aligned, and not that everyone's saying the same words all the time, but that people are communicating within the kind of boundaries of that core story that I've just presented. And one of the ways that we've started to do this is through two really awesome and amazing tools that have been developed by Frameworks in collaboration with Telethon Kids and with funding from the Minderoo Foundation. One is a short guide that allows you all to apply this story, these recommendations. And the second is an online self-paced e-learning module, which kind of gets into more detail about how to do that. And so with that, I will say thank you all very much. As always, I encourage you all to frame on. And I'm going to hand things over to my colleagues, Annette and Maren, to talk about their work now. Thank you all very much.
Wow. Thanks, Nat. That was an awesome presentation. And you've really set the scene well for us around those framing keys. And for Maren and I now to share a little bit about our experiences in actually applying those keys in the field. Look, I just want to start and acknowledge I'm presenting today from Lutruwita, which Tasmania, and presenting from the land of the Muramina people. Acknowledge their ongoing custodianship of the land and sea, and pay my respects to elders past, present and future, and to all Aboriginal people on the presentation today. To start, I'm just going to give you a little bit of an overview of who is B4 and what we do and where we've come from. So B4 is the B4 Early Years Coalition, and B4 being that period pregnancy to 4, before school. It was launched by the Tasmanian government and is funded by the Tasmanian government as a collective impact initiative in 2016. And as a social change initiative, B4 is looking to engage, support individuals and organisations to get behind the early years with 3 goals. Everyone understands the importance of the early years. Everyone understands the actions they can take in the early years. And everyone works together for the early years so that we can ensure that every Tasmanian child in the early years is cared for and nurtured no matter what. Currently, B4 has about 250 individuals and organisations joined up and wanting to be part of this movement for the early years. Now, this all sounds wonderful. 250 individuals and organisations wanting change. But as we started to move forward, we realised we actually had a problem. In getting people to understand the importance of that period, pregnancy to 4, we had all the early years experts in the right-hand corner, and we had the general population over in the left-hand corner. The early years experts were passionate, enthused, reading all the recent research, and actually couldn't understand why the left-hand corner wasn't coming over. When we went over to the left-hand corner, the general public had no idea and couldn't understand why we were all so excited and why we were all going on about the early years. That then got backed up by some research that Nat and his team did with frameworks, with Telethon, around early childhood development in Australia, which really just empirically sealed that, look, there's this gap of knowledge between the expert and the general population around their understanding of the importance of that period of development. And unfortunately, that gap's just getting wider. We then looked at some more research thinking, okay, we know what our problem is now, is we need to bridge this gap. As we looked at some other research that had happened in Tasmania with the Tasmanian Early Years Foundation, we actually found that 70% or up to of parents' information around child development was coming from their friends, their family, or people that they knew in communities that they had trusted relationships with. We looked at some other research, and I just think this is a wonderful survey, the Edelman's Survey of Trust. It's an annual survey, and what it was showing in Australia was people's trust in governments, businesses and organisations is decreasing, but people's trust with people they have a relationship with is increasing. So we just knew another glossy brochure from government was just not going to cut it. So we had to find another way. We had to tap into that informal information highway of those friends, families, and other networks. And just as importantly as tapping into that highway, we needed to find the words that worked. We needed to find those words that were going to accelerate conversations and not block conversations. We were basically looking for some superheroes. And as that showed in his presentation, through Telethon Kids and the work frameworks is done around with a lot of other partners that B4 was lucky enough to be part of as well, we got two superheroes. We got the quick start guide for the core story, plus we got a set of e-learning modules. We got the words that work, the words that would allow us to bridge that gap. B4 had already started what we called a B4 Community Storytellers project. And this was around tapping into that informal net or highway of information sharing. What we did was identify community champions. So people in the community that had already a skill set in training, had connections, were embedded in their community and had a passion in the early years. What we did with the champions was train them up in the B4 key messages, which is around the Eracy Nest messages, skill them up in how to be the best storyteller they can be. And that's around telling stories for impact and for change. Now we're also able to add in words that work training. So not only can they tell stories impactfully, they can tell stories that are now going to accelerate the conversations that they have. Our community champions then go back out into their communities, identify those informal highway networkers, and give them the skills of the key messages, storytelling, and words that work. So over time, we are just going to saturate Tasmania with the key messages around the early years, using words that work through stories. And we know stories work. The evidence, the research sits there. Stories are impactful, and particularly stories that are emotive and stories that connect with us. Some of the research, and I'll just read a quote from an evaluation from our training of our community champions, which noted that trusted, influential community members are the fastest way to increase community understanding on the importance of the early years and change behaviours through intentional and strategic storytelling. We're now adding, especially when paired with words that work. So what have we found out in the field with our storytellers, with our community champions? We've had conversations with tradies on the early years with our community storytellers. And some of the words that have really resonated for them is the emphasis on the importance of the early years for now and later. With a number of the tradies actually coming back to the organisation that was having the conversations to get more information about things they could share with families and friends of what they needed to be doing, the actions they could be taking for children now. We've also had one of our wonderful community champions talking at her local gardening club, full of grandparents, full of aunts and uncles, talking about the importance of belonging, talking about the time they spend with their grandchildren and their other little ones in the early years in developing that love for nature and just those opportunities for play and discovery. And the fact that what they're doing is building brains and bodies. And this is all about now and for the future. We've had chats. I know I was talking with a young mum at one of our local child and family centres. She had a beautiful little newborn, 2 or 3 months old. And I just said to her, "You are an amazing brain builder." I mean, she just looked sideways at her. And I talked to her, I said, "You know how you're just talking to your baby and you're making sounds, your bub was coming back to you, blowing raspberries, doing the bubbles. You then went back." I said, the flash word for that is serve and return. But I said, what that is brains grow by interaction. So what you're doing is helping your baby grow. And babies need that interaction to grow their brains. So that's why putting them down with TVs or screens doesn't work, because there's no interaction. So their brains can't grow from that. So your baby's brain needs you and needs your friends and family to grow. Some of the other ways that B4 has looked at how do we incorporate and embed the core story into what we're already doing. I mean, like yourselves, we're all busy people. We actually don't have time for another job. So it is around how do we just put it into what we're already doing. We've now made it part of our induction for all new staff in B4 that we do the e-learning modules and that we have the Quick Start Guide. And my Quick Start Guide lives with me. It lives on my computer, it lives beside me. I refer to it constantly. I've shared it across, I sit in the Department of Education in Tasmania. I've shared it across the department, I've shared it across stakeholders. With B4, we have a monthly newsletter. We're going to have a Words That Work section in our newsletter and keep every month pop up a new story in there to keep promoting and sharing. At a recent B4 partnered with Early Childhood Australia Tasmania. We held a forum. So we had a captive audience of 100 early years professionals. So I got Professor Donna Cross to kindly video an overview of the core story and the work that's been happening. And we then broke up the 100 participants and got them to practice and use from the Quick Start Guide their elevator pitches around advocating for the early years, using words that were going to be effective and words that were going to accelerate their conversations. The other reality here is this work is very new. We're all learning. None of us are experts, but we need to be out there having a go And now that we know the words that make a difference, we'd be mad not to use them, because that's what we're invested in this area for in the early years, is that we want to make a difference. And now it is my great pleasure to hand over to Merryn for her to share some of her learnings and what they've been doing up in the NT. Over to you, Merryn.
Thanks very much, Annette. I was really excited to hear about what's happening with B4 and the early childhood story. And I like that, you know, it's around helping people have the confidence, the skills to have those key messages and the storytelling and the words that work to resource people up in what to do. So I think sometimes it can feel a bit overwhelming when we're talking about how to do this new reframing when you first start learning about it. But this is a really great way to have this conversation. So before I start, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm presenting from Larrakia country, and I pay my respects to the Larrakia people as the custodians of these beautiful lands and seas on which I'm presenting from in Darwin in the Northern Territory. So yeah, I think sometimes when we're talking about it, it can feel a bit overwhelming when we're talking about reframing, but it doesn't have to be about huge changes. So what I want to do today is share some of the ways that people and organisations have started using framing in the Northern Territory. So 2 years ago, for National Child Protection Week, NAPCAN shared research that Nat and the Frameworks Institute had done with Australia's Parenting Research Centre, the PRC, around how we talk about parenting. And as with the clip that Nat showed, public opinion was very much around the individual parent and blaming parents, you know, if things weren't going quite well, without seeing that broader social context. So what that research found that was, rather than talking about parenting tips and skills and effective parenting that can make parents feel judged or that the worker's an expert, that the best way is to start from a child development frame. So this fits really beautifully with what we're talking about today. They also developed and tested a metaphor that talks about parenting as being like sailing a boat. So sometimes it's smooth sailing, but there can be times of storms and rough waters. So it's a bit like the loaded lorry metaphor that's working in the UK. So NAPCAN developed a little short workshop to share this research and to start supporting people to put it into practice. And this has led to a lot of interest in the Northern Territory, and people are becoming more aware of the language they use and the impact this has on families, on children, on people working in organisations, and also on departments and things that are actually funding the programs that we work in. So it can take a bit of adjusting to the way you think and you communicate. So years ago, I used to be a preschool teacher. So if I had any conversations with parents, they always started with the child, talking about the child. I then came to Darwin, I did a social work degree, and I moved into family support type work. And my way of communicating shifted to focusing on parents and parenting. But since learning about framing in the last couple of years, I can now really see the benefits of sticking to an approach that focuses on the child and their development rather than talking to parents about parenting. So I want to share some examples with you, and the first one is from a child and family centre in Palmerston. So a couple of years ago, I was running a workshop in Palmerston, and one of the participants, as we were talking, said, "Oh, now I understand why that worked." So they'd been running a group program for Aboriginal dads and calling it a parenting program for Aboriginal dads. And hardly anyone was going. They were finding it really hard to engage people. So what they did, a couple of weeks before we were having this little bit of training, they'd recently changed the way they promoted it. So instead of talking about a parenting program for Aboriginal dads, they said something like, "Your child's development is important. come and learn about how you can support it now and for later. Lots more dads came and they wanted more and more sessions. So the actual content of the program didn't change much. It was much the same. They just changed the way they communicated about it and promoted it, from a focus on effective parenting, on being a dad, to offering parents an opportunity to support their child's development. So the way we communicate can actually engage parents and caregivers, or it can actually push them away, especially if parents might be feeling judged. So that was about promoting a program. And the next example is about having everyday communication with parents. So this is the HIPPY program in Darwin, provides home-based support for families with young children. And what they say is coming and learning about the reframing has helped them pay more attention to the language they use and in the ways they encourage families to take part in activities. So they now do that more through focusing on the child rather than the parenting and their skills. So for example, some of the parents they work with say they struggle to get their kids to school. So instead of saying, oh, so how come she didn't get to school? They'll say something like, does she need anything to get to school tomorrow? Or what does she really like to do on a Thursday that she loves to do? So focusing on what the child needs and wants. Also, if they go on a home visit, they used to say something like, and here's a new book you can read to your child. And, we'd normally think there's nothing wrong with that, and there isn't anything wrong with it, but they've reframed it to be something like, I think your child is going to love this new book. I can't wait to hear about what she does for this activity. So reframing for NatCan, we've got lots of resources out there, and it's been a bit of a wake-up call for us too, and we're changing the focus and the language on many of our resources and the way we talk about things. So one of these is a clip, a video clip that we use in our training all the time around the continuum of well-being, of child well-being. Pardon me. So there's a sentence in there that once we learned about the reframing and how to frame parenting in positive ways, just really jumped out at us as not being very helpful. So the sentence is, we all try to do the best we can in the very difficult job of raising our children. What we've done is we're changing that to, we all try to do the best we can in the very important job of raising our children. So if we think about, when we talk about the very difficult job of raising our children, for me anyway, that makes me feel heavy. I'll go, oh yes, it is really hard, it's really difficult. And it doesn't really look at options of what's next. If we talk about we all try to do the best we can in the very important job of raising our children, it actually feels really uplifting and more hopeful. And that's just, as Nat said, one word can make a difference. So, yeah. Part of the journey in learning about this way of communicating is that you tend to firstly notice when things aren't framed in a helpful way. Rather than, and you don't necessarily know what to do with it then, but you just know that, oh, I don't think that's quite right. And this happened when I ordered some resources from Parentline, who are operated by Boys Town in Queensland, and they run a telephone and online counselling service for parents in the NT. So we were just learning about the importance of our language and framing in the lead up to Child Protection Week a couple of years ago, and I ordered some new promotional materials. I was very excited. I opened up the box, and when I opened it, I went, oh my gosh, this is not how this new research that I'm learning about says how we should be framing our messages to parents. So if we can have that first slide now, thank you. This is what we had. So it was full of posters and other materials that talked about kids don't come with a manual, raising kids can be fun but tough, and a bit like that, the difficult job of parenting. When you talk about parenting can be tough, it takes you down that channel of difficulty, I guess. So I went, oh, what do I do about this? So I rang up my contact in Parentline and had a talk to her about it. and explained what this new research was about. And she said, oh, that would explain the response by my daughter the other day. She said, I put up one of the new magnets up on the wall, up on the fridge, and it was about parenting being tough. And my daughter said to me, Mum, that doesn't actually make me feel very good. You know, I actually thought you liked being a parent. And when you talk about it being tough, that makes me feel really bad. So what happened was it led to ParentLine changing some of their resources. If we can just have the next slide. And so they redeveloped some of their resources to be more positive and child focused. The one that is my favourite is kids do better when parents feel supported. So that's using that message, focusing on the child first, and we do need to support parents. But we do that because it helps kids do well. I actually contacted ParentLine for permission to use this little story, and the posters are still on their website and some of the new resources. So the CEO has said she's going to follow up with their marketing team to see what happens in the next stage of their marketing. So changing the way we frame and talk about things can take time. And we also need to get others in our organisation on board as well. So the PRC, the Parenting Research Centre, runs the Raising Children Network, which I'm sure most of you would know about. And they have about 60,000 pieces of information on their website, and they're working through every single one of them to look at how the messages are framed and to focus rather than on effective parenting, to be around child development. So when Annette was talking about, you know, having champions and people sharing the messages, a surprising example of a new storyteller was a high school coordinator of a Certificate 2 in childcare studies. So she, as a result of learning about framing, she made a really big change to the way she taught a unit on child safety and wellbeing to the childcare studies students, as well as the assessment piece, which was to develop a poster for National Child Protection Week. So originally, the task she set was around the impacts of child abuse, and the types of posters that the children would create would have pictures of kids with black eyes and looking sad and looking traumatised. After learning about framing and the navigating waters metaphor, she changed the assessment task with a focus more on the context of parenting and not blaming parents. And this is what the students came up with. We can have the next slide. So this slide, these posters, rather than children with black eyes and looking, you know, awful, it actually focuses on prevention. It's focused on child wellbeing and supporting parents. So not only are these inspiring and positive messages using the reframing research and the navigating waters metaphor, apparently the students actually felt much more engaged in the activity and much more positive about creating these posters. They really got behind it because it was a way of looking forward and it made them feel really good. So my final example, don't change the slide yet in a sec, is from the Larapinta Child and Family Centre in Alice Springs. They work with families down there. And this has only just come through to me today, so I'm really excited about sharing this with you, because Alice Springs really got behind the reframing research, and so Larapinta Child and Family Centre have embedded this approach into the way they think about and communicate with families and the broader community about their work. So what really resonated with them was the Start with Child Development focus, which is the core of their business. So just for example, when parents comment on their child's behaviour, often negatively, at the, you know, they might be using the centre and their comment in a negative way about their child, the response from Larapinta is to describe the expected developmental stage of the child. So it might be if the parent's complaining that their 2-year-old doesn't share, it might be something like, well, you know, actually, developmentally, children don't learn that, and their brain isn't quite ready for sharing just yet. So it's actually, you know, something that you could expect of children this age. What they've also done is reframed a lot of their written communication, and I'll go to the next slide now, thanks, with a real focus on the child. So their byline for all of their activities now has become babies and children thrive when families are supported and connected. And they've attempted all their promotional material to frame around what's best for children's growth and development. So there are a couple of examples there. Supporting our culture supports our growth. A sense of belonging helps babies and children thrive. A couple of others are nurturing children's growth today builds a better tomorrow. And children thrive when they belong to people, place and culture. So many of their messages are also focused on celebrating strength-based positive messages around Aboriginal culture, language and families. And they're actually looking at using this type of framing to tackle racism in how they can do that. So the last slide I want to show you, Lara Pinter partnered with Tungunjia Women's Family Safety Group, which has developed a campaign for children called Girls Can, Boys Can. Have we got that last one? And this aims to challenge those gender stereotypes that underpin family violence. And once again, they've framed a byline around child development. So their byline, as soon as I saw this, I went, that's been framed. Kids thrive when they're free to be whoever they want to be. And they've got a number of posters and things. I think you're going to get information about where you can, websites and things that you can access that information. So children need us to get our messaging right. So if we can use this evidence around framing, we can help to win the minds and the hearts that Nat talks about, winning the hearts and minds of people in ways that can make sure that families and communities have what they need to help children thrive and do really well. So I'd now like to invite Rani and Annette to join me, and I think we've got a few minutes left for some questions.
Thanks, Merryn. That was fantastic. And thanks, Annette and Nat, for all your useful insights. I think that was a really stimulating discussion and took us on a really great journey from the research that Nat talked about, Annette, to your community-based practice and implementation right on the ground, Merryn, to your examples of services and agencies taking on reframing. And I think one of the important threads that I was hearing is that we know that we have words that work, but there's also channels that work. There's ways to implement this work that is different, and we've got to find those channels. Annette, the sort of examples you had about your community champions and those trusted community members that have that influence to change mindsets. And Merryn, your example of Parentline, for example, changing their language, and that other program for the dads that actually found a different way to engage dads around that program without changing the program, just the way they framed it. I think it's really important to reflect on the fact that one change then has a cascade effect on a lot of people, because anyone coming to that program from there on is getting more of an impact. So it's not just, you can do something simple in your practice and you can have a big impact. So I think that's a really important thing to kind of think of when you go, oh, this is just a small change, but it can have a really important impact. We do have some time for questions, probably just 5 minutes. I'll get to them now. And remember, any questions we don't get to, we will do a bit of an extended version recording. The first question we have, and I think this is the pertinent one for most people, Annette and Merryn, is do you have a cheat sheet for what not to say and how to rephrase or reframe content as you go along? I think that's what most people want to know. How do you get into this? Annette, would you like to start?
The cheat sheet is the how to tell the core story, the quick start guide. And look, do the e-learning modules. What I've found useful is also within your team, try to get a bit of a community of practice. That if you're just framing by yourself, it can be difficult. But if you get colleagues that are also using framing, you can bounce off against each other, and you're not going to come up with all the ideas. That's why you have a team. Others will come up with some ideas as well, and be gracious to yourself. You're not going to be perfect 100% of the time, but it's about having a go.
Yeah.
Mm.
Excellent. Mary?
I'd agree. It can be, so speaking of cheat sheets, I've got one here too. So this is the cheat sheet about reframing parenting. That's from the Navigating Waters, from the Frameworks Institute and their Navigating Waters information. So the Parenting Research Centre, sorry. So that's a bit of a do's and don'ts, what to, when you're talking about parenting, avoid talking in this way, but do talk in this way. So I think that can help people have some confidence when you've got those. I think your guide, Annette, that guide is amazing. I did have a quick look at it and it's like, wow, that's what you need. And it's when you're starting on this journey, you need a starting place. And I agree that having people around you, you don't always get it right the first time. And what's right anyway? It's around massaging what you've got and go, right, well, I don't think this is going to work. So let's have a think. How can we get together and talk about shifting the way we're framing it and look at those resources that are provided to help us? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think those are the best places to go. There's a question about, there's so much negativity. How do you stay positive in how you talk about these issues with families and clients? Merryn, would you like to take that one first?
I'll start. I think there is a lot of negativity, and there's actually some tips in how to avoid that, and some of the information that is on the PRC website as well. But I think you can even just start like that, when the NatCan video where we changed one word and it changes the whole way people respond to that. So changing from, the difficult job of parenting to the important job of parenting can actually push some of that negativity away. I've just got an example also of one of the stories I heard from a childcare centre was that a mum came in one morning and she was very distraught. She had a toddler and she had a new job, and she was really worried about, she was running late for the new job because the toddler was doing the things that 2-year-olds do and was finding it really hard to get organised. And she was crying and really upset. And the worker said, you're riding the toddler wave. You're riding that wave and we're here to help you come down the other side. And so often what we might say is, all toddlers are like that. But if you say all toddlers are like that, that mum might go, well, why can't I do something about it? Why is it affecting me so badly? But if we use that type of metaphor, that here's the wave, we know it's going to come down the other side, and here we are to help you. It's a different way of looking at things, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think the key for me is that we've got keys. It was what Nat was talking about, those framing keys, that if I go back to the issue that B4 identified is that, in the right-hand corner, we had the experts, the knowledge, the passion around the early years, and in the left-hand corner, the general public who really couldn't understand what the fuss was all about. And where the negativity and frustration was coming was that neither side was hearing each other. But now we've got the keys that allows that conversation to happen, so that we can actually share the knowledge from each other in an effective way, so that we hear each other.
Excellent, thank you.
Sorry. I was just going to say, when you're focusing, so if the negativity, if parents are feeling threatened or judged, then if you're focusing on child development, you're not talking about a parent or judging their parenting at all. You're talking about what children need and the supports that the parent might need to make that happen, to support the development. Yeah.
Absolutely. I just wanted to add to that, that with negativity, one of the core principles for framing is not to name the problem, to not kind of repeat what you don't want people to take away. So to, you know, be conscious of naming the solution rather than the problem. Okay, so our next question is really about how do we encourage reticent parents' participation? Merryn, I know you had an example earlier. Did you want to start with this one?
Well, I think, you know, often parents might be reticent to come to a program or, you know, to engage in services if they're feeling judged and, you know, they're feeling like they don't fit, you know, they don't fit comfortably. So the way to avoid parents feeling judged is to not talk about parenting and call things parenting programs. And I know this is a bit of a dilemma for many people that I talk to. They go, well, that's what we're funded. We're funded as the blah, blah parenting program. But by just shifting the language and using that child development focus once again, it's not around you as a parent, it's around your child and how we can support you to promote their development and help them do the best they can. So I think that focus on child development first is one of those key points, if you like. Yeah.
Excellent. Annette?
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, it reminds me immediately, going back to Nat's presentation, of where it had parents skipping out on their child's vaccinations. You know, it's that one word, I'm not even going to be able to say it, you know, but, you know, the hard parent.
Yeah.
It's about, we need to shift that language and shift our focus around what is it that's not making it easy for people to enter our services? What's making it not easy for people to approach us, to have conversations, for us to share information? What's not making it easy for families to access the services and that supports they need when they need it to help their children to thrive? So it's, you know, very much reframing, getting rid of that word and looking at what is it we can do to support parents help their children thrive.
That's perfect. Thanks, Annette and Merryn. Annette, that really leads us into our next question, which is about, in this time where people are in lockdown and many of our interactions are online, how do we keep engaging families and communities as a way of promoting child wellbeing? So exactly as you were saying, it's on us to look at the ways of engaging and encouraging families to participate. Do you have any more thoughts on that in an online world?
Yeah, look, it is reaching out and it is sharing with parents the value of connecting, whether it be family, friends, however, through online mechanisms, through Zoom, Facebook, whatever you're doing. But it's a really important part of development and well-being for their child, that belonging, being connected is critical to their health and development. And popping them on Facebook, as much as, you know, I would never support putting children on a screen at any other time. But this is really important for children to maintain those connections with people they have loving relationships with, connections with their friends, connections with activities they might be doing. Really important for their health and development, and really important now and into the future.
Excellent. Merryn, did you have anything to add?
Not really, except that in some ways, you know, in there's times of COVID, which means people can't physically be with others, it's actually elevated the importance of staying connected in other ways. And so those online ways, as Annette said, are ways of helping children feel, you know, really connected with the people that care about them. Yeah.
Fantastic. And we've got one question, I guess, that's really important that we do think about this. What are some of the strategies that either of you or both of you might have that can be used to prevent complacency and slipping back into the old habits, the ways that, you know, we've all become so accustomed to going to using our language in a particular way? How do we stop using words that don't work?
I think it's really challenging, actually, because, you know, as we said before, there's not a start point and an end point. It's a journey. So it's all, and part of that slipping back is part of that journey, I guess. So I think to stop the complacency is to be aware of the impact of your communication on others, and to notice when you've reframed something and you're talking about it differently, when it is having an impact on someone, how someone else receives that message, you know, that you're trying to communicate, and to practice and to surround yourself, if possible, with people who are really passionate about reframing as well, and to have, you can keep those conversations alive. Yeah.
Annette,
Yeah,
did you have
look,
anything?
no, absolutely agree with Merryn, and I think the other thing is to look out for those warning signs, you know, within your practice. You know, for me, I describe these as conversation accelerators. That if suddenly your conversations are getting blocked, if suddenly people are disengaging, if suddenly, you know, people are walking backwards, that's when you've got to really pull up and go, hang on, what am I doing? What have I done? Why aren't people actually engaging with, you know, my conversations, engaging with my reframing? Oh, hang on, I'm not framing. I've gone back to my old ways. You know, I've gone back to talking about parenting and how hard it is. Oops, better pull myself up. And also being kind to yourself, that we are going to make these mistakes. You know, this is really new information, and no one's an expert. We're just in having a go.
Fantastic. Absolutely. We notice that at NAPCAN, don't we, Merryn, that we do slip up and we do help each other and we catch each other and say, oh, I'm not sure if this is right. And that's really about having a go, being conscious and aware of what you're saying, and really having that community around you to keep promoting it and trying to, you know, move in the journey together. Thank you both so much. That was really great, and really appreciate both your insights. Thanks for that.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you.